We'll see. Oh, there he is. Of course. Yeah.
Hello.
Wow. Someone's in Vermont. All right.
I think Matthew is muted.
Matthew has to unmute himself.
Way low now.
Here I am.
Yeah. What a crowd. I'm impressed.
We've all made it, except one person is lacking video.
Who's that?
James, I think?
Yeah, James is the boss. He
Nice.
might be here. Yep. Are we live? Has it begun?
I have
We are
one.
live.
Yep. All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's
Hi.
3 months. 3 months
Yoda.
stuck at home. Many of you are now no longer stuck. You're out there, but we've been stuck. And we are all composers and musicians and inventors and thinkers who care about the natural world. So what's happened to the natural world? What's happened to nature in this time of quarantine? Anybody have any thoughts? Hearing anything? Somebody's making noises.
Well,
I would say that from where I am in Glasgow, it's a lot quieter. At least until recently, it's been a lot quieter, a lot fewer cars, lots of birds in the garden. And it's been, obviously I don't want to make light of the bad sides of what's going on now, which of course are enormous, but it has been really nice to see that the city can have less traffic in it and more wildlife, and that it's actually possible to do some great listening right outside my door, or actually from right inside my room even.
Well, I haven't noticed much of a change in Berlin because Berlin is, although it's like the biggest city in Germany, it's not really a congested city. It's not like a noisy city, apart from certain areas, but we're not in one of those areas. So, yeah, I mean, it was always, as always, it's full of bird song, and you still see that fox.
Yeah. Well, I've been asked to make sure everyone introduces themselves. Like, who are all these people? So maybe we'll go around the screen, start with Matthew, and say a few sentences about who you are.
My name's Matt, composer. I build synthesizers, done a little work with David, and sit around and think about sound way too much.
I'm David Rothenberg, a musician and philosopher and professor, and I've done a lot of work with natural sounds, playing music with birds and bugs and whales and people, performing with many of you on the screen here today over the years, and really trying to expand what music can be and who's allowed to make it, what species are allowed to join in. Leon.
Hi, I'm Leon, and I'm a musician, and it's interesting that we're talking about nature because I very recently have, basically since the time of the pandemic, I made it upstate to a house that I just bought with my wife up very near to the site of the original Woodstock. But anyway, it's the first time after 30 years of being in the East Village in Manhattan of really being in nature. So it's quite a difference. I can't vouch to how it's changed because I just got here, but anyway, but I'm a musician. I do a lot of electronic stuff, and I also, play piano and do acoustic music as well, but I have an interest in, electronic sounds and devices.
Emily.
Oh,
Emily's a little silent.
Muted.
Right, thank you. Right, okay, hi, I'm Emily. I'm a composer. I'm from Canada originally. Now I live in Scotland. For the past 20 years or so, I've written a lot of music which uses sounds from the natural world, especially birdsong, though not only birdsong, also sounds like wind and rain and seals and whales and various other species. And I also do research on the relationship between animal songs and human music, I've done a couple of interdisciplinary projects working with biologists, studying birdsong from an interdisciplinary perspective. And I'm always looking for different ways of approaching it, different ways we can approach listening to animal songs, the different things we can understand from them and get out of them.
All right, Bernhard, can you hear anything? Can we hear you?
Yes.
Good.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I fixed this somewhere. Yes. What am I? So I think I'm a musician, producer. I run something which is somebody could call a label, together with my friend Markus Reuter. And yeah, these are like some of the things we do. Well, people think that they call me an electronic musician because like I'm basically using electronic gear and means to make my music. This just happened this way just because I can create my ideas with that kind of tools, and I think I just gathered some knowledge about it in all those years I'm doing this. Yeah, maybe that's more or less what I meant.
Okay, Rob Thorne in New Zealand. He's the only person speaking to us from tomorrow.
Kia ora koutou, tini whitu ki te rangi ko Ngāti Māori ki te whenua, ti hei maui ora, ko Tainui te waka, ko te aroha te maunga, ko Waihau te awa, ko Ngāti Tumutumu te iwi. Ko Rob Thorne hau. I'm Rob Thorne, I'm an anthropologist, I'm a musician, and I have spent the last 20 years involved in the revival of traditional Maori musical instruments, taonga pūoro, which are basically instruments that are made from stone, bone, wood, and shell, and I compose and collaborate and perform and write. That's me.
All right, thanks. Lisa Robertson from Fort William in the west coast of Scotland, in the Highlands right now.
Yes, yes, I'm a composer and a violinist. I think I use natural sounds in pretty much all of my pieces in some way or another, largely influenced by where I'm from, which I'm surrounded by seabirds and sounds of quite extreme weather, all sorts of these sounds, and I try to bring that into my music in conjunction with influence from traditional music, traditional Scottish music, and trying to find sort of links between those two sound sources, with a view to kind of examining relationships between humans and the environment in various different ways. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks. And Korhan Erel in Berlin.
I'm an electronic musician. I'm mainly an improviser, but I also play in bands and orchestras, and I make music for dance, theater, video art. I myself make sometimes sound installations when I'm asked to do. And I use, I don't specifically use nature sounds, I also use them. I use basically environmental sounds in my music or in my sound design, and in my sound installations too. I don't come from music in the sense that I'm like a self-taught musician. I actually used to be a consultant, but I'm a recovering musician.
Are you a recovering musician or recovering consultant?
I don't know. I'm a recovering consultant, discovering musician.
All right, so all of us are like, we're doing this because we've been stuck, like one way or another, we've been stuck away from what we're normally doing, it seems, because music is a public activity. I'm sure all of us had a lot of performances. We were probably thinking of performing somewhere in the world. And all of a sudden, this whole activity has been called into question, you know. It's like, has this changed us? Anyone feel like your whole way of thinking about life is called into question by this global crisis?
Absolutely. Yep. I guess here in New Zealand, we're quite contained, and that's maybe one of the advantages that we've had. It's always been a disadvantage being so far from the world. But I lost such a huge amount of, well, basically I'm a performing musician, so I lost a huge amount of work in the next 6 months, that now that we've moved to level 1 is quite likely to come back online. But it's actually the international work that really I feel is what I do, you know, and is what makes me. In regards to nature, though, you know, we weren't allowed to go to the beach, or we weren't allowed to go into the bush or anything unless it was immediately within our area. But yeah, I think for me mostly, it's given me an opportunity to just kind of begin again where I started, which was that the playing of Tonga Portal, coming from being a band musician and a performative musician. Tonga Portal was, the beginning of it for me was a very personal thing. So it was doing it on my own, you know, and learning about it from that way. How's that for a conversation starter? Was it?
Yeah, I mean, everybody, you know, who thought that, you know, I had devoted a lot of time saying, well, you know, there's so much media out there, there's books, there's music, it's endlessly available. You know, it's hard for something to stand out if it's media. Everything's just flowing online, free, available. The things that matter are live events, showing up in person, doing something with people. And all of a sudden we can't do that. We're like stuck. It's like the world of technology has won against us or something. Contact is now forbidden. And we stare at our screens all day, where, you know, you don't see anyone complaining anymore about screens ruining your children's health, because now you just have to go to school online, even if you're 5 years old. Even 2-year-olds around here go to school on Zoom. Daycares are held on Zoom, you know, yeah.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Only the other day I wrote something on Facebook that is, well, except for New Zealand, obviously now, but the situation is all over the world. You can't even pretend that you are a successful musician or artist somewhere else. So look, I may be not so successful here in my hometown, but like over there, I'm a big thing. And nobody would believe, because there is no such thing like a real live event anymore. And now I think that's the other interesting thing. I mean, like, well, for me it was always the output, what we release. The actual moment of making music was that making of the music itself. So there was always this drag or something that pulled me on stage or to make music in front of people. But now the only thing that is left is the internet for the time being. And yeah, this all applies to like all of the musicians and performing artists. And that's really something we didn't have before, I think.
This can't be true. The real world has to still exist somewhere.
I have to say, I was going to say that. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead.
I've just an observation. I don't know if any of you have had this experience as well, but I did catch a few online performances of friends and people, and it just isn't the same. I mean, you kind of, I was sort of curious, oh, can this really replace a live show? And you know, even if it is electronic and it's coming out of 2 speakers or whatever, there's something about being in a room, you know, with the people that are making the music. I was kind of curious to see what my reaction would be, but it's in a way, it's sort of heartening to to feel that you know, there's something there that's unique about being at a live show, you know.
I do think in some places, like as restrictions are starting to ease up, people are figuring out ways to do concerts outdoors, or, you know, maybe for a very few people at a time. And although, I mean, obviously I'm 100% not in favor of pandemics and, you know, that thing.
I do like them.
I do think that as we're figuring out, and, you know, there's all kinds of terrible things that, you know, that are happening. Like, it's been speculated that people won't be able to sing in choirs for 2 years, and there's all kinds of really awful losses that come with this. But at the same time, as people are figuring out how to go back into performing and interacting with people, I think there's also, like, rather than sitting around feeling miserable for 2 years because we can't sing in a choir. We can be thinking about what kinds of outdoor site-specific performances can we do, what new ways of relating to other musicians and other performers and other audiences can we find that, you know, are not online, but are also not just trying to get back into the same concert hall situation right away. And I think, you know, I think for, oh, well, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's definitely kind of stemmed a surge of creativity in terms of finding ways of doing things online, but the fact that it's always changing. So going from having to compile recordings from performers in isolation to then moving to these kind of outdoor things, it's definitely sparked creative hidden things that I've had.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that's interesting is people, you know, rather than putting together, say, an ensemble of like this person from that country and another person from that country and another person from that country, people are having to perform with the people in their household, or maybe, you know, maybe they live somewhere where they can get together with one other household. So they're planning not only who they want to hang out with, but who they want to make music with. So I do think there's some interesting combinations that people are coming up with and that will fry as we're going through this. And I hope that even when we can perform in sort of the more standard context, we sort of remember the creativity and the trying to find new ways of doing things as well.
I mean, I think it's great to see up there 4 people who over the last 3 months I've performed online concerts with from all over the world.
David.
In Nightingales in Berlin. So Rob and I and a bird in Berlin, we managed to do this concert together. We couldn't get the headphones on the bird, so that the bird's track was there's a little bit of a delay and print through and such. But it's amazing we did these things, and of course being there in person would be better. But even thinking of this, you wouldn't have thought of doing before. So there is some kinds of new creativity that does happen. Even though, for me at least, there's this melancholia underneath it all. Like, what's going to happen to all of us?
Sure.
Yeah.
World.
I mean, well, I'm working a lot on my live setup. So, and I made like some really interesting improvements, but I'm really wondering if I will ever have the chance to try it out or to like represent it in front of people, or when will that be, you know? So it's still really interesting and it's big fun to do that. But on the other hand, I'm always thinking, if this is now only just like my spare time thing, like kind of a hobby, or why am I doing this?
I think, yeah.
I've resumed actually. Like we can play concerts now indoors.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and I'm actually going to start rehearsing for a project. I actually have upcoming concerts.
All right. Yeah.
With actual people.
And any rules about that? How many people are allowed to be there?
There's a gradual plan. Like now I don't remember the exact figures, but it depends on how much room you have, and like, you know, you have to spread the people evenly. Like the other day there was a concert, I wasn't there, but they played 3 sets for 3 different audiences, one after the other. And I am going to play an outdoor concert in July, and yeah, I mean, even now, if I want to, I can go and like organize a concert indoors with limited audience. Or there are also like venues which have windows. They actually perform out of the window, 2 people outside. So it's like both an indoor and an outdoor concert. Yeah, people have got to find solutions, and I think concerts will have to resume, because otherwise there's a business side to this. Like health insurance companies are going to go broke because they will have to bear all these like psychiatry bills, right? People are going to go nuts.
Exactly.
Without music, without social activities. So it's actually it might turn into something that's worse than COVID in the long run. So they will eventually, like, you know, relax. They will eventually.
Yeah, it seems like we will all eventually be back. But will we be back to normal, or will we be doing something else? I mean, there's been a huge resurgence of people interested in nature sounds and field recording. Thousands of people around the world are getting into this who never did it before and are asking questions and listening. And that's because I think a lot of musicians find, okay, I can do this. I'm allowed outside. I'm going to listen and pay attention to the world, and that's going to lead to some interesting music.
I think that's what has happened for me. Really, my own personal process has been about returning to a deep state. So I think it's for me, I found it very challenging to be in a situation where I'm required. I always have found it very challenging to be in a situation where I'm required to seek work, to push that work, to promote and to market, and to be something else that really I'm not, and I don't do well at that. And so, so the opportunity to create deep work and to know that the work is just important on its own, for the sake of my own soul or my own healing, and that in some kind of a recorded state or something that might be able to be shared is what has been happening for me. And in a way, it's kind of a way of combating the issues around the internet, which is all that we're left with now if we want to socialize or to perform, is that whole idea of deep work and deep state.
Yeah, I like that idea. I know there was some Pauline Oliveros inspired giant deep listening sessions with thousands of or hundreds of people on Zoom listening and doing something. Were any of you part of any of those? Did you hear about that? I don't even know how it worked, but I can see that. I'm sure if Pauline were around, she would have gone gung-ho with the latest technology. She always liked all these things. So Matthew, you're someone who escaped. You escaped New York.
I escaped New York.
It looked like the wilderness, but you're in the woods somewhere up there, aren't you?
Yeah. I'm up in Warren, Vermont, and I've definitely been doing tons of field recording. I've definitely, I think the field recordings will be used somehow. I think they might be used for sound libraries or something, but I'm primarily doing it because, I think I've always done field recording mostly because it's a way to learn, I think. It's a way to hear relationships between sounds, hear distance works outside, hear how similar some like a really good room reverb is, and then like just being in a forest and clapping, and then how dissimilar they are as an experience. There's tons of things to just sort of sit and think about. Primarily how things are mixed, but yeah, I've enjoyed it a ton, and I got to hear grouses in the wild for the first time, which is one of these sound studies things that always pops up on YouTube videos. Everybody goes, "Look, I heard about this thing." So it was a jarring experience. There's tons of cool stuff that's going on.
Can you explain what that sound is like to those who don't know?
I will. I'll do it in a roundabout way. The experience for the first time was I was hiking up the mountain, and I was just noticing that my skull sort of like, as I'm walking, makes like a little sound in my head, sort of like, and it's just like a thump. And then all of a sudden I realized like that rhythm is being interrupted by a thumping. And I stopped, and my skull kept going. And then I was so scared that like my nervous system did that thing where I was like, oh my gosh. And it just sort of thumped, and then got faster and faster and faster. And then it sort of crescendos into this like stutter effect of just very low, like 60 hertz thumping. And then just stops, and it's largely invisible. I haven't seen one yet, but I've heard at least 20 or 30 of them.
Are you hearing any capercaillies in Fort William?
No, not particularly, but yeah, it's been I found it interesting just having a lot of time to be in this same place without going anywhere beyond where I can walk. And I made the point of going the same route every day, and just having kind of the time and space to really observe how different it is from one day to the next, and also to kind of map the changes of season. And I hadn't really taken the time or the persistence to do that before. So yeah, that's been quite interesting, inspiring.
I feel that same thing. It's a time of year I often miss because lately I've been in Berlin this time of year playing with nightingales, and now here at home for spring, every day different birds arrive, different plants, and like and it's been a weird spring. It was really cold. It's later and slower, so things are coming out at the wrong time. I'm listening to a lot of underwater pond sounds. You go to these same ponds every few days, and you just sit there, and you know it's just a localized kind of repetitive activities, and it's all interesting and surprising, and then you don't know what all this material is for, why, you know what it, but the attentiveness, a lot of people I know are speaking of, they're paying attention to stuff that was always around, and to me at least it sounds a lot different. There's fewer airplanes, fewer cars, and you know there's way more animals. There's like 10 baby skunks walking around my lawn the other day. Like, where did they come from? And you know, all kinds of animals are, and many people are saying things like this, like you feel the human presence is different. And some people say it's the beginning of a completely new approach, like after this is over we are going to be different. And others say don't kid yourself, it's just going to be back to normal as soon as people can get away with it. Any of you feeling these kinds of things, like normality elusive or returning, and sound revealing it?
I guess you need to define we.
All of us, you know, like, yeah.
No, I don't think like your average person will change dramatically.
Yeah.
Not in the way you think they will.
I don't know how I think they will. I know that you know 20% of them are going to be out of work, so it's going to change what people do.
Well, in that way, yeah, there will be bad changes, but the rest, I mean, in Turkey, where I'm originally from, the shopping malls are open and people are just going to shopping malls,
Right?
Like they used to do like 3 months ago.
But as musicians, is everyone thinking we got to do something else because there's not going to be tours and performances?
Can I just answer your previous question, which is like I have young kids, they're 4 and 7.
Yeah.
And just found out today, so when they go back to school in the fall, they'll be in classes of 11 students. They'll be going 2 days a week, and they'll be having more outdoor education, which is great. I wish, I wish that was what they were always doing. But I think certainly like for them, having this come at such a formative time in their lives is going to change how they see the world. And I'm hoping that, you know, having fewer hours behind a desk and more hours of outdoor education and maybe, a slightly more flexible life, I'm hoping it will change how they interact with the world.
What are they going to do the rest of the week?
Good question. Right now, my husband and I are just splitting childcare and work. So we each, we're doing our work bit by bit, but very slowly, only the essential things. And I guess there will have to be flexibility as long as the kids aren't in school full time. So I do think, I agree that it's like, who are you talking about? But I think that, one thing, I've been thinking about natural sounds in my music for a long time. And of course, if you think about the natural world, you think about climate change and pollution and how things are changing. And I feel like for decades, we've sort of been told, oh yeah, but you can't stop the economy. Sure, climate change is bad, but there's no way we can halt progress. But it's clear now that actually things can change, things can stop. Obviously, in order to have a more sustainable world, this is only a tiny amount of change that would, that would need to happen. But after feeling like no matter how horrible, the destruction going on in the world is, there's no way you could stop the engine of capitalism, then to see that actually there is a really bad problem and the world can stop and address it and try to make it better for many people. And I don't think people are going to forget that it's actually possible for people to prioritize things other than profit. And I hope that people will take that knowledge and work towards a world that's better for everybody in many different ways. So I don't know. I mean, I do think that there will probably be sort of a return to business as normal, maybe to a certain extent. But on the other hand, I don't think people will forget the scale of change that is possible in the way people live their daily lives.
Yeah, that's impressive. Yeah. Do you think there's changes in music that can be part of this? Like, can we change something about what music is to be part of this change that you're describing so eloquently?
Oh, good question. The thing is, so, you know, I feel like because I get about 4 hours a day to work and, you know, various teaching and other things like that, like, I feel like I've got all these ideas stored up in my head. I'm working on a couple of, like, I've been using this time to really get to know the birds that live here in Glasgow, because it's funny, even though I'm always listening to bird songs, for the last couple of years, I've had a number of commissions from Canadian ensembles, and I've been just spending, even though I've been living here for 5 years, I've been spending quite a lot of time with Canadian birds and not as much time with birds, though. There's a European blackbird just outside the window, and that's actually the bird that first got me thinking about animal songs and music when I lived in Amsterdam 25 years ago. So it's interesting that I'm sort of, you know, the bird that started me thinking about, music. The songs is right, you know, there's another one. It's got, of course, a very different song because their songs are all quite individual, but it's right outside my window, sort of reminding me of where this interest started and also sort of grounding me in my new landscape. I think I got sidetracked. I don't remember exactly what the question was now. But.
So you made me remember that, of course, one of your friends, you know, from this time 25 years ago when I knew you back then, and one of your friends, a composer, he sort of stopped being a composer to be a world traveling bird song recordist. This guy's from Scotland, Magnus Robb. Is he still doing that? Like roaming?
Yeah. Do you know Magnus Robb, Lisa? No, he'd probably be about 50 now, and he lived in the Netherlands for a long time and then Portugal. But he was a fantastic composer and wrote a lot of pieces based on birdsong, and then they were getting like even more and more based on birdsong, and then he started recording bird songs, and then he became a bird song recordist, and now he publishes bird identification guides and recordings and things like that. I don't think he's composing anymore. I am in touch with him every now and then. I mean, if he does write music again, I'm sure it will be fantastic. But
his boss, who is the founder of Lush Cosmetics, you know, Mark Constantine, this guy is actually obsessed with not just bird songs, but bird song sonograms, the printouts of bird songs. And this guy, I mean, he's a major, you know, businessman, but he started this company with his giant books of sonograms. He thought,
I didn't know that was.
That was sound approach. So the books are like, you know, he thinks that the general public is going to read these sonograms, be obsessed with birds. And this is what he does, you know, and he also works with electronic musicians like Simon Emerson from Afro-Celt Sound System, one of his best friends. He commissions him to write these bird song based pieces, you know, to play in the shops with the soaps and potions.
Funny, I had no idea.
The layers of Mark Constantine and birds. I hope he's watching this, by the way, because he appears on Facebook sometimes, to know that, you know, the levels of what you can do, you know, whether you're a composer or a field recordist or a business person, you can follow your obsession one way or another. And he seems to be still going on doing this, and the recordings are quite amazing, and the presentation is great. And what I love about it is it's so idiosyncratic, and it's like a giant art project. There's no way the general public is going to learn about bird songs from these books. They're more like crazy artistic analyses of the beauty that's there. It's the kind of stuff that I would like, you know, and you know, that the layers of possibility is actually very few composers, musicians, and certainly very few, you know, business tycoons who are obsessed with listening to bird songs and nature and put it into their life and work. And like, you know, more people should be doing it. And it's great that in Scotland, you know, I think in Scotland, there was actually an official call for a PhD student to work on humpback whale songs from a musical perspective, was there not? And you found
that's one of my doctoral students, Alex.
You didn't invent that. The government was looking for somebody. How could this?
No. Luke wrote the proposal.
Luke did, but still.
Yeah, Luke and I and Ellen.
Great. So, but you started, but you know, then you went out there looking for somebody.
Right.
Which is, you know, that's fabulous.
Yeah. I think Scotland's a great country actually for you know, interdisciplinary research and for interest in the landscape and the soundscape. And it's one of the reasons I moved here, because I already had lots of collaborations here.
Soon to be an independent nation, I'm sure.
Let's hope.
All right, I have a question because I haven't yet incorporated animal sounds into my work, but the composers who are doing it, are you using recordings? Are you transcribing the pitches and using them as themes in your work? I know David improvises with the animals live, but I'm just curious about the rest of you.
Do you want to go, Lisa, first?
Yeah, well, I listen to recordings. I don't tend to take the recordings myself, but yeah, listening to recordings and then transcribing by ear to as accurate a degree as I can by ear. Yeah, that's how I do it.
I would say, oh, go ahead.
I make recordings in nature or in the city, and I don't write music in that sense. But what I do is I basically any recording for me is raw material for instrument design. Because I improvise with electronics, I improvise with tactile surfaces, and I basically use that as a material to create as instrument with that I can granulate, change, transpose, speed up, speed down, and I basically turn that into something else. And like nature sounds can be a great material for that because they have very like interesting frequency distributions in comparison to city recordings. And I also like use them sometimes as like, again, raw material for sound design for like theater or dance, contemporary dance, but not as bird sound, but as just a sound, like as a texture. I like seeing these things as, I mean, I don't catalog bird sounds or city sounds. I just use it as just as a texture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I tend to do a lot of transcription also from recordings. I don't usually make my own recordings, but actually right now during lockdown, I have a couple of small lockdown commissions that are supposed to be, you know, based on my experiences now that the people I'm writing for can play now. And those ones I'm really trying to base not only on, you know, certain species, but on the specific birds that are in my garden and that are in the park near our flat. So I have actually been, for the first time, really making my own recordings that I'm going to then transcribe. And I would say, you know, in my pieces, you know, I've had some pieces where I've tried to transcribe the songs really accurately, though of course I never try to transcribe them to sound exactly like the song, first of all, because it's impossible. But second of all, I could just listen to a recording of the song if I wanted it to sound exactly like that. So I always sort of think about translating them into a way that people can experience them, you know, through playing them or hearing them. So it ranges from, you know, trying to be quite accurate and faithful to the song and trying to not really add anything of my own to just writing down what the song makes me think of. So, you know, you know, there's a lot of pieces where you can tell that it's based on a bird song and what species it is, but there's probably some pieces that are more abstracted than that, but I still have ideas for the piece that I wouldn't have thought of if I hadn't been listening to that song. So often, you know, I often start transcribing a song and then go off in a certain direction that is not exactly the bird song, but it's also not exactly what I would have thought of if I had just been improvising on the piano.
I definitely, I've spent, I mean, I've done a lot of recording of animal sounds, but I think one of the main ways it's influenced my work is I noticed after doing a lot of it that as long as an animal, especially, I mean, mammals and birds, as long as they're not right up on the mic, they're strikingly expressive for how sinusoidal they are. I mean, even large mammals, when they're in the distance, show up as basically sine waves. I don't want to, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's 1,000 flavors of sine waves with different, you know, how many beeps can you record? But, and so what I've done for the last 2 years is build a synthesizer that only works on monophonic sine waves. and just like how many different textures and even simultaneous textures and rhythms you can integrate just using one sine wave, no cheating with FM or anything. Just yeah.
Are we gonna, when we hear this thing, are we gonna think animal sounds, or are we gonna, is it gonna sound like more natural than other kinds of electronic sounds, or not
I
necessarily?
mean, I think the goal for me is to I think there will be sort of like a mode in which, I mean, the idea behind the way it's structured is that no matter how you're using it, because it's one sound and you're just generating pitch and amplitude, those are the only parameters. You know, you could have a robot beeping and then you could hit something that's a little bit more organic and have them morph together, because it's an illusion that you're doing more than one thing, because it's only one thing the whole way through.
I guess I don't use animal sounds or nature sounds specifically, rather more I embody and make music of nature and from nature. So often people experience some kind of a geopsychological effect with the sounds and the music that I make that seem to be unique to this land. I create with spinning discs and mouth harps and electronic musicians that I collaborate with. I mean, they love this stuff. They love working with this stuff, and there is this kind of natural filtering that seems to occur using found. So yeah, and shells, and so shells from the beach that sound like other things from the beach. And I guess as an anthropologist and a musicologist, then we kind of enter this idea of the difference between a sound maker and a musical instrument, which I think is kind of a fallacial argument, really. Especially
Wait, what is the difference? Is there supposed to be a difference, or?
Well, I guess in a pantheistic cosmogony, there is no difference, right?
Right.
So yeah, so I find that that is often people want to collaborate with me because of the fact that they work with animals or the sounds of animals already, or they're intrigued by the idea of the fact that my instruments and my sound possesses nature somehow.
I remember fondly when I played with Richard Nuns many times.
Yeah.
Rob, in Istanbul, and it was a fantastic experience. Those instruments are amazing.
Yeah, I think. Oh, by the way, hi Facebook friend that we've never actually ever met face to face, Korhan. Nice to meet you. Yeah, and I think and there's something else about these instruments which, whether it's cultural or whether it's inherent, is this idea, which might be kind of relevant in this discussion, which is this idea of grief that seems to be sort of irremovable from out of that sound. So there's this sadness that seems to be possessed within the sound, and I think that's interesting. I mean, I don't feel sad or anything, but people are often challenged by what seems to be sadness within the sound, and I'm always interested in wondering how that connects kind of with nature in itself.
Can I ask you a question? Do you feel like there is sadness inherent in the sound, or is it other people who are feeling like that? Because I'm wondering if they're feeling that the sound is a connection with the natural world or something. Are they feeling a sadness for a connection they want and they don't have, or do you think it's actually something that is inherent in the sound?
It's interesting because there's kind of two sides there, right? I don't notice the inherent sadness, and often it's something that people dislike. They want me to be happier, and this is why I brought it up, because with Richard Nuns, who is the original master of the revival of Tonga Portal, he always had this particular joke. He was a very funny man, but he always had this joke that he used to grumble and say, I don't do happy, and yet, like, if I played Cafe Otto, and the stage stormers afterwards were, people who had never been to New Zealand but imagined, had these visual experiences around glaciers and waterfalls and bush, and I'm really interested in the sounds that these make around the whole idea of cultural inherency to do with emotion and in music. The idea that the major scale is happy and the minor scale isn't. But yet, so for me, I don't think that the sadness is inherent, because I'm not intentionally inherently sad, which is what drives what I do, right? Is my intention, I think.
I mean, it's interesting, Rob, you've introduced these kind of, strangely naturalistic instrument sounds along with electronic musicians, but also you've played often with string quartets and classical musicians as well, correct? Do you find that, a difference in how these different genres react to sounds that are unfamiliar to them? Is it a similar kind of alien mix, or it flows easily, or what happens?
I think, again, because of Richard Nuns, there isn't really much that can be done now that hasn't been done already in terms of collaboration, and I'm always looking for something that hasn't been done before in regards to that. I think in terms of, like, say, with electronic musicians and people who work with field recordings and that kind of thing, there's this, they don't have this need to be in tune that classical or Westernism requires, and so it is those who dwell within the Westernist kind of aspect that have these that they have these aspirations around what's sad and what's happy. But yeah, for me, I think because my instruments just sit within what they do, and you can just slam it over anything really, or under anything. I don't notice really anymore. My ear is either woke or it's ruined. I think it's one of the two.
You brought up the subject of originality. I'm wondering if you guys have found, when I think about the music I've been doing for most of the music I've been doing for a long time, it's been in the electronic realm. And what I'm realizing just listening to this conversation, that it's not so much that I love electronic music, but I think I wanted to, it's an easy way, I think, electronics to have the potential to create something that hasn't been heard before. And as someone who grew up playing piano, playing classical music, playing jazz, it all started to feel like it was, ground that had been picked over enough that there wasn't much left original. So do you guys feel with nature sounds, are you able to find that originality, or do you combine them in unusual ways? Or I'm just wondering if you have any of you have any thoughts about originality in music with natural sounds. Yeah. I
mean, I'm sorry, Rob, that you it makes me sad to think you feel like it's all been done, but it makes me happy to think that it was Richard who did it all, because I remember he stayed at my house for like 2 weeks and he really enjoyed reading all the books. He didn't want to go anywhere, and it was like a good use of all this stuff around this house that I felt good about that. But I think that and Leon, of course, you should all know that Leon is the first person to think that the computer keyboard should control like musical notes long before Ableton Live and such. you know, and he already in high school was playing with like 23 note scales and 47 note scales. Can you show us your instrument, which is actually called Samchilian Tip 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 Cheapy? That's the name. And Leon is such a character that I wrote about him in a book, and people was sure it was fiction. Like, how could you make this stuff up? You know, there's no way this is true. Then I just dragged him out and we played together when the book was released. And so he, you know, literally, we may all type in a computer to make sounds now, but Leon started it, and his instrument's very different in that the notes are not, the keys are not notes, they're intervals. So you hit F and G together, you're going up in thirds or down in fourths, you know. It's like a wizard of arpeggios, and it comes with a free guide to carpal tunnel syndrome. You know, so Leon, I'm sure, you know, has always believed that originality goes on. And I think for, you know, droning on here, you know, for nature sounds, I think for me, on the one hand, is something to connect me to the more than human world and feel like I'm not just a human, but also to really learn all these musical cultures. Like, once you think that animals are making music, what they're doing, their sounds are much more accessible than if it's a language you might have to translate and can't. All of a sudden you can learn from all these structures. And like, this is what Olivier Messiaen did already. You know, he, you know, I have to write an essay about him right now, so I'm thinking about this. And, you know, ornithologists say like, yeah, this isn't accurate. I can't tell what bird that is. It's like not the point. He wanted a source of inspiration to make people do weird things. He would transcribe a bird, hand it to a clarinetist and say, you play this. He goes, I can't, it's impossible. It is not. You will make it possible. You know, you will play this new way, these structures, these rhythms from beings that hear 5 times faster than us. You're going to do it. And you will become a larger human and musician as a result. And I think that it's always a challenge to put the unfamiliar within our constraints, but it kind of stretches us in all these ways. Like, you know, these Maori instruments, you know, the putorino, do you blow it, or is it a wind instrument? Is it a brass instrument? It's different things at different times, you know. The Samchilian, you're tapping, you know, it's possibilities that you don't know how to connect. You know, is the music written down, or is it sound morphed with electronics? You know, they can all meld together into still things we haven't heard and don't know. Like, you know, we could all play together right now and make something original. No one's heard it. I may never hear
I
it.
think my immediate response to Leon, for some reason I thought silence, which of course has been done before, but as we all know, but also that, and then you spoke about animals and the sounds that animals make as being music rather than as being language. And I was someone was having a conversation with me the other day about dogs and how they seem to talk to each other without saying anything, which is again interesting, because is that music just because no sound has been made? So for me, you know, it's the space between notes, and that there's just more and more and more now, and especially, and I think maybe that's relevant to this conversation, which is you know, the silencing of humanity on the planet, and what happens when you allow that silence to sit, and then the animals come out of the woods, right?
Absolutely, all kinds of weird stuff. I'm, you know, I saw like a you know, what was like a green heron, a small marsh bird, 50 feet up in a tree the other morning going, rah, rah. They never do that. What's he doing? You know, weird stuff is going on out there.
I think one of the things I really like about using animals, you know, using animal songs in my music and studying them is it is like a window into a mind other than my own. And as I was just thinking about that and what I wanted to say, like, you know, obviously, like, we can't just take another person's idea and use it in our music, but then is it okay to take another animal's idea and use it in our music? And I was thinking, as I was thinking through this, I do use a lot of different kinds of animal songs in my music, but I have a special fondness for animals that also imitate humans. It feels a little bit more reciprocal because, like, I'm curious about what they're saying, but they're also curious about what I'm saying. Or, like, you know, gray seals are an animal that if you go out to the water and sing, they'll start howling also. And there's reports they can imitate sounds, and they, you know, they'll come and listen to people singing or playing. Have you ever done that, Lisa?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. So, and, you know, all the birds that imitate bits of human, sounds as well. And it makes me feel a little bit more like it's actually a mutual curiosity, even if we're using them in very different ways. I certainly have used bird songs in my music that, were from a species that doesn't also imitate humans. And I love doing it, and I'm going to keep doing it and studying bird songs and writing about these bird songs. But there is 2% of me that thinks, is it really okay to transcribe this hermit thrush's song, or should I be leaving that to the hermit thrush? And I don't know.
Aren't you writing a whole book on the song?
I am going to be writing a book on hermit thrush song, yes. I've been studying hermit thrush songs on and off for, 13 or 14 years ago. It's actually partly why I'm in Scotland, because
because there's absolutely no hermit thrushes. You'll be in peace.
Right, there's no hermit thrushes, but when I first came here in 2007, I met Tecumseh Fitch at St. Andrews University, and we started writing this paper about hermit thrush song, and I was, listening to the hermit thrush, and slowed the song down. It turns out that it's based on the Overtone series. So then we ended up writing this paper about it. I had never written a scientific paper before, so I was like, oh great, it's based on the Overtone series. We'll just write that down and publish it. But of course, Tecumseh was like, no, you have to listen to hundreds of hermit thrushes and measure the songs precisely. So I spent the next 7 years doing that, and then we published our paper. And then, in spending so much time with them, I really absorbed sort of the hermit, how they create their songs. And I ended up writing a couple of pieces based on hermit thrush, a number of pieces based on hermit thrush song in various different ways. But more recently, I've been looking at naturalist writing about hermit thrush song, and also American poetic writing. Now, those of you who are not in North America may not have heard them. If people want, I can play you a hermit thrush song, or I can send it to you.
Please play it right now. Let's see how it sounds.
If I can get my technology, I think I need to share my screen, and then
share computer sound.
Right, but I have to share the screen to share the sound.
No,
but
you can share the sound only if you click on one button, maybe.
I don't know how to do that, but I'm going to try to do it this way.
Okay.
Okay. So, share computer sound. Okay, share.
Yeah.
Right. So here is a hermit thrush. There it is, slowed down.
Oh, something is.
No, it's slowed down.
Cool. Yeah.
Sorry, and I have a longer clip of the hermit thrush song. This one was recorded by Richard Webster. Okay. So those of you in upstate New York and Vermont will have heard these. Right. So then here's the slowed down song.
Wow. That's amazing.
Pretty amazing, isn't it? So I'll stop playing now.
And each phrase starts in a different place. That makes it more complex than all the related thrushes.
Now I can't stop it.
I was just out with an expert birder. We were in the mountains listening to thrushes, and we started hearing all these other kinds, the Swainson's thrush, and of course the famous Veery, Bicknell's thrush. And then when I started investigating this, it turns out all these supposed separate species hybridize, and you have in-between thrushes that make the whole thing like a giant jam session of mixed genres and things. It's totally a warren of weird birdsong discoveries, and you realize that a lot of odd stuff going on out there.
Is it only for like following the actual notes of those birds, or can you find the nature? I mean, like you just said that you were following those animals in the bushes and everywhere. Can it be that you actually bring in the nature into your music just by being in the nature all the time?
Absolutely.
Is it more like that?
Absolutely.
Yes, that happens all the time. You start to think like a mountain, think like a thrush.
I think this is a great point. Like I've got a friend that I collaborate with. He's actually based in Berlin, though he's back home here in Christchurch, Fis. And he works a great deal from an intentional space. So as an electronic musician, he's got all of these what he calls heart recordings in his work, and it's just basically him sitting in a quiet space recording what would be his heart or his intention, and then including that, and it comes out as, you know, it comes out as a fuller nothing sound. You know, it sounds like dead air, but then when you incorporate it into a recording, he feels, as I do too, I agree, that it carries that intention into the recording and out to the listener in the same way that any kind of visual art might that you don't understand. And I think the stuff that Emily's doing, like what she was explaining and how she's slowing it down, you know, this is very similar to what David's done with cicadas, yeah. tomatoes, and I think this is like this makes me ask the question that David's often made me ask to myself, which is like, when you slow all of this stuff down, how you slow birdsong down and it sounds like your work, that Emily, when you slow it down, it sounds like a particular flute of mine.
Oh yeah.
Like all these animals, are we all saying the same thing but just at different speeds?
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons I like, you know, transcribing animal songs. And for most bird species, I do end up taking them down a couple of octaves and slowing them down quite a bit, because a lot of birds process sound much faster than we do. So if we're listening to the way they're making the sound, you know, the speed they make it, it might just sound like a little chirp to us, but they're actually hearing it as something very complex. We have to slow it down to hear the same level of complexity. But it's another interesting thing about the hermit thrush, and I mean, anybody who knows me knows that I can talk about hermit thrushes for hours, and I will stop myself soon. But one of the other things I find really interesting about studying the hermit thrush is it's one of those bird species on which people have thrown their projections about what the ideal person is. So there's this whole body of naturalist and poetic writing. I recently sort of went through every newspaper in the database of American newspapers that was published between, you know, from 1600 till now. And I found like 128 poems about the hermit thrush. They're all called like To a Hermit Thrush or Song of the Hermit Thrush or something like that. So there's 128 of these poems written between like 1850 and 1940, and they all say exactly the same thing, which is like the hermit thrush is this very solitary bird. It has a beautiful song. If we listen to the song, it will bring us closer to God, or a sort of naturalistic version of God. And it's true, it's a very solitary bird. It has a very beautiful song, but this is also like sort of the whole American transcendentalist ideal. So this sort of way Americans like to think of themselves was projected onto this bird. And of course it is a suitable bird for that compared to the crow. They say the crow is not solitary. It doesn't have a song that humans tend to perceive as beautiful and so on. So, you know, it makes sense why they projected this onto the hermit thrush, but at the same time, it's clear that that the projections people are putting onto it, and they're like these 128 poems all say almost exactly the same thing. So it's clear that people have this idea. And then some of these poets you actually read, they never actually heard a hermit thrush. This is just what they know they're supposed to say about hermit thrushes. But interestingly, before that, when, you know, naturalists were all trained in Europe and then they went to North America, they had this really appalling idea that everything in North America was degenerate compared to the European farms. So a lot of the naturalists that went from Europe to North America in the 1700s had this idea that North American birds would either be silent or they would only squawk. So from the late 1700s, there's all these European scientists in North America, early 1800s, writing that, oh, the hermit thrush doesn't sing at all, because they were just convinced that they weren't going to hear it sing. So, you know, and they weren't looking for it. So they went back and said, that's true, none of the birds in North America sing. But then as,
sad. Sad, yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, I just recently finished a book chapter about the hermit thrush and American cultural identity, which is absolutely not something I ever thought I would be writing about, because I'm, you know, that's not my field at all. I'm not a poet, I'm not an American identity scholar, but yet just from like studying the song and then how people have understood the song, I found this path that I had to go down, and I find it quite fascinating. And I really like, I guess I like that aspect of looking at birdsong too, like how it fits in culturally and how people represent it. There's all kinds of literature, like from the late 1800s, like Europeans, used to write about how European birds were better than North American birds. So then American scholars started writing about how North American birds were better than European birds. And there's all this stuff from about 1880 to 1900 with people saying the hermit thrush is the best bird. No, the nightingale is the best bird. And so I've just enjoyed seeing all these strange bits of history you can understand through representations of bird song.
Play songs for nightingale. See how they react. See what the nightingales think.
Thanks to the hermit thrush. I don't think either of them would be particularly interested in each other's songs.
Nightingales love all sounds.
Do they?
Hermit thrushes are more ethereal, but if 150 poems about them all say the same thing, maybe it's true. Maybe it's not projection. Maybe like the bird is really something.
I think there's a lot. There's a lot of direct repetition of words. So I think, I think what actually happened is John Burroughs and Walt Whitman were friends, and they talked a lot about hermit thrushes and wrote about them in a certain way. And then those were the people you read if you wanted to be a refined naturalist who was, sort of elevating your soul. So you see the repetition not only of the same concepts with the same words, but I agree. it also is a bird that has it's very solitary and it's got a very beautiful song. So it's not.
But that's the same with music. Like if enough people listen to Mozart, then we think it's good, and maybe it isn't. Like maybe it's all.
Absolutely.
I think that's true. I just, I've never had a more controversial post.
I wouldn't say Mozart, but
yeah. But,
absolutely. If enough people listen, or if enough people, if there are enough critics that agree with something and say that it's good, everyone else is going to say it's good.
Yeah.
But again,
or there's music no critics like that all the people like Kenny G being the best saxophonist of all time. But critics don't like him, musicians don't like him, but he's more popular than all the rest of us because he exaggerates emotion, like maybe some birds do. They exaggerate.
Is there a bird that poets don't like, but people do like?
Yeah, that's a good question. What bird do poets not like, but people like? It's a good.
Poets are people too, but
some of them are bats.
Has anyone slowed down PG music?
Which one?
I can't hear you.
Music. Has anyone slowed it down and listened to it?
Say that again.
We can't hear you.
Music. Has anyone slowed it down?
Which music?
Kenny G.
I have. It sounds like.
Is there more complexity in the tones?
Kenny G.
You speed it up and play it for birds.
The popularity of Kenny G is easy to explain because he exaggerates, the gestures of emotion that musicians say is too much vibrato, too much of a sweet tone. Like the stuff that, we learn is not refined, it's too much of something. And then so
it's not natural, right?
General public likes too much. And some people say like birds are like this. Peacocks have too much display, nightingale, too much song. They use the excess argument. But, we all know that there's like, if you study, like if you're a composer, they might teach you like movie music. It's too much obviousness, too much excess. It's not as interesting as like music that's composed with more refinement just to be listened to. But, people like this stuff that's more obvious, like excess, this style, this stuff is out there. Like, that's something that goes on. And some people describe evolution that way, excessive ornamentation rather than the refined sense of beauty. I don't know how much we can go with these analogies, but I'm sure whatever kind of music we're doing, someone's always told us that there's too much of something that the less educated like. Too much reverb, Eventide effect boxes, too much of it is considered like, you're doing too much, but then someone shows and messes with the aesthetic and changes our ideas about that.
Yeah. Does that explain the use of the word unapologetic in criticism?
Like the critics or the musicians? Who's
I hear when people are writing about music, they always say it's unapologetically poppy, as if it's not just poppy.
But weird things become popular, and so then but this idea of this sense that some people look to nature for the opposite of this. Some people will say in nature, nothing's too excessive. It's like a balance, but then the ecologist will say this is merely an unrefined sense of, and of course, those who study bird songs know that, the longest book, Emily, you're probably going to change this, but so far the longest book on a single bird song is about a 3-note bird song, the Eastern wood pewee.
Really?
Yeah. Wallace Cray, you got to read this book. He's the founder of ethology, Conrad Lorenz's teacher. He said, the Eastern wood pewee that goes, pewee, pew, pewee, pew. This is the greatest of all bird music. He specifically says the hermit thrush is nothing compared to this. And, it's an amazing book. And then, he was a scientist trying to write about aesthetics, and the birds were incredible. And, he talks about this kind of stuff. And so the idea is that people, fixate on one aesthetic view and decide like this is amazing, and someone else says it's simplistic, like minimalism. Is minimalist music incredibly beautiful and perfect, or is it like oversimplified, or are there different people who we all have our aesthetic choices that might all be personal taste, but we also kind of feel there's something objective about it. So I'm intrigued if so many hermit thrush poems say the same thing.
I'm really interested in the anthropomorphism in this conversation and the whole idea. And what I'm interested also in is, which Emily tweaked my interest almost immediately with, this idea that birds hear faster or process sound faster, and this is science. And how does science know this? I'm sure there's a whole conversation.
We probably don't actually want to know how science knows this, I'm going to guess.
But then we want to assume that birds process sound faster, and we want to assume that birds process sound faster, and when we slow it down, there's all of this stuff going on. But then also how, like in an indigenous perspective, there's no separation between humanity and nature. Like, we are of nature, it is we're nature, so we understand nature. Nature understands us. But there seems to be this thing like this. It's not anthropomorphism. Well, maybe it is. Like, it's individual anthropomorphism into the critique of music. I understand this music. This music speaks to me in this particular way. I'm putting my feelings into this piece of music and analyzing it. Right?
I think the best part is the opposite of that, where you hear something and it sends you in a new direction. Like, I didn't think it would be so cool to slow down a hermit thrush song and play along with it. Like, I knew you could do that. When I first did it, it's like, whoa. And I had read like, oh, there are pentatonic scales. And then you slow it down. No, it's its own scale. And it's always a little different. It's kind of like, it's not in tune the way we want it to be in tune, but it makes sense. And when I was first time in Scotland and went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I saw some kind of performance where a guy got up and he was like adjusting these bagpipes, and there were different instruments from all over the world. And he was saying, well, it's not going to be in tune. It's going to be designer out of tune. Like designer genes, and so like the hermit thrush is designer out of tune because it's evolution in its own design to have its own kind of pitches. And so I would want to play along with it. I just learned this different kind of tonality and structure that I never would have thought of. So like, it's anthropomorphic if I make my own human music out of it. But what I'm playing along with is something from another world. I really don't know what it means, but I learned it, and I often improvise along with that sound, that slowed down recording, but it's not, it's really like a composition that's evolved over time. I've thought about it so much, or I played along with it more than thinking. And so it's always like based on the past experience, but always a bit different. But because it's not in tune the way we can easily understand it, it's sort of always elusive. We can't quite get there. And that's kind of what inspires me so much about nature. We're never going to quite understand it. It's like we have glimmers of connection, but it's always a bit beyond us and therefore interesting. Just like playing music with a human you can't talk to, maybe you don't share a spoken language, but they're playing something, you can make some connection together. You can't talk about what it means, you just kind of do it.
Absolutely.
But
It's
aren't
like the dog.
birds be popular at the end of the day by singing?
Is what?
Aren't birds like trying to be more popular than other birds by singing?
Some of them, but some of the best singers are the least popular. They never find a mate. They just keep singing and improving throughout the season. So you have these nightingales that are incredible singers that are alone, the last one standing. It hasn't worked out for them because when they mate, they sing less. They're still singing beautifully. you know. What did you say, Emily?
Well, I don't know.
Sounds like
Maybe
life.
their songs are too fancy. Maybe the.
Yeah, that's right. It's too much. Yeah,
Too
like
much.
I also always think what a frog biologist told me once that, like, I don't know what species they studied, but just that, all the papers are saying, oh yeah, they have to get their song, the best, and then the female will choose to mate with that male. But in practice, what they actually see in the field is that the female mates with the male that's closest. And I mean, like if there were two that were equally distant apart, then they might go for the one with the better song. But for all that goes into improving the song and making it better, it's actually a very small part of what.
right, and the famous thing about frogs is they're all singing together. It's like a giant party, a giant jam session. But one study showed that individual frogs would prefer to meet elsewhere. They don't actually like it. They would prefer, given the choice, to meet more quietly rather than going to the big disco. But it's just like humans. Where else are you going to go? What else are you going to do?
Right.
And maybe this is a good example of how.
There's a question here, and this is exactly the kind of thing I was talking about. Everyone is asking this question in field recording, Facebook groups and stuff. What's the best low-cost field recorder that I can buy? People are asking this 20 times a day in quarantine. And usually the same answer is given by people, which is that the best ones are not made anymore. They've gone down in quality.
What is it?
If any of you wants to weigh in on this question, I know what I would say. Matthew is an expert on gear, and he has one of the coolest low-cost field recorders. You can tell us how he likes that one.
I actually, right before this, I was scheduled to go to Columbia and do field recording, and I ended up buying a ton of low-cost field recorders, including a bunch of like Chinese knockoff of like voice recorders that just sound terrible but sound amazing, and those are super fun.
What would you advise this viewer on YouTube? What should he get?
I mean, am I allowed to make brand recommendations on
Absolutely,
Eventide? Yeah. I just say stay away from the H4n. That's my thing. Friends don't let friends buy the H4n. But I work with a Zoom F8, so.
But that's too expensive. What would you tell them to buy?
I like those little Tascam lipstick recorders with the two Electret mics on the top.
Like,
this
one.
Right.
Yeah. I have the one with the slightly smaller, but yeah.
Yeah, Tascams are pretty good. DR05. You have the Sony A10, right? That's a tiny one. Do you like that?
Yeah. That is spectacular. Yeah. Got some good parrots with that.
Everyone likes the Sony M10. They don't make anymore, which I use. And what we like about them is that they're less noisy. But the other thing I would tell anybody starting out is most of these recorders, you can plug in really good microphones to them. It will improve them completely. Like a field recording microphone plugged in will give you better recordings, and also how you adjust them. You should never use the auto levels. You should adjust the level. Yeah. And most people use the auto ones, and you can probably turn them up more than they're automatically set at. And then you kind of listen and see if you're getting enough signal and not too much noise. When we made our Nightingale recordings, we had many recorders because we had no idea what we're doing. We just stick them down here, press record. Sometimes the cheap ones sounded better than the expensive ones, sometimes opposite.
I made very good experiences just with mobile phones. I was very surprised how good they are. I mean, I made my most sustainable recordings with just a mobile phone.
So I think we have to say goodbye to Rob Thorne. Maybe he has to go to sleep because it's in the morning. He's been up all night partying, and because his country's totally free. It's back to normal. And if you don't,
I actually have to go to work.
Back to work because yes, he's an essential worker. And so
that's what musicians are in this mentally unwell time. Thanks, David. Lovely to meet you all.
You all soon. The rest of us
to meet you.
Continue at least another 10, 15 minutes or so, and then we have 90 minutes of this. I know a few people are listening, and a lot can be said. And I still want to know, has this period been different? I know a lot more people are listening to nature sounds. Are we listening to more of them and thinking differently about them?
I mean, what is a nature sound anyway? Is the car on the street, is that a nature sound?
To some people, it's a field recording. Yes, it can be.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, like I did some recordings just over there on this bridge where there like those parties happening almost every night, and it was just an experiment, and it turned out like those recordings I could like for any reason they fit into any project I have, and if I just granulate them down to like the smallest bits of a waveform, it still gives it a certain like different mood or quality, and I still don't understand it, but it seems that it contains a certain, what is it, naturality or something. And
Yeah, there's
so,
something about these real sounds that inspires things, and also certain recordings like immediately take you to a place that a lot of people present these as their work. Here's my field recording. I like to think of it as something to start work with. And a friend of mine sent me a recording of New York City, 3 a.m. after the protests and looting. And it's just the whole thing is full of fragments of menace and possibility. Just listen to this. It's like, wow, And this guy, Jeff Gersh, made the recording. He's a guitarist in the Blue Man group. And of course, he hasn't been playing for months. So he's just going out recording stuff. I'm afraid he did use a Zoom 84N. Sounds great. Yeah.
Reminds me of a friend who once visited his mother, and he went up to the attic and just made recordings of the attic, and there was almost nothing to hear, but it was like totally amazing to listen to it, and like after a minute you could hear like a car in the distance or something happening.
Yeah.
But you knew it was in the attic, and I still don't understand how that worked. But yeah, it's interesting.
Matthew took my bat microphone here and recorded the sounds of buses screeching to a halt in New York City at a 192K and slowed it down in like a beautiful ethereal choir sound that somehow the ultra high frequency bus braking sounds were like way more interesting than any of the bats that were hard to find, And
I just used that in a piece.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And so, but this is an example of how technology can make us perceive, because these frequencies we can't hear, but our machines can bring them to us. It's like the audio equivalent of a telescope or something. And we can hear these things. And, the hermit thrush is beautiful as it is, but you slow it down, we have time to wonder what's really happening there. Pretty interesting. And I don't know, the sound of storms in the music you write, in the stormy Scottish coasts. How do you actually do it?
Well, try to find ways of making it with instruments. Always searching for things that sound like it. Mostly string effects. Things from Foley artists that I've come across, like using bubble wrap and plastic bags and stuff like that, kind of rustling effects.
You think the musicians become Foley artists? You tell them down the viola and pick up this plastic stuff and do this? That's pretty cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
To the point where Bernhard was talking about the attic recordings, my favorite field recordings that I've done are all the stuff that I've put the field recorder in abandoned places, and you get incredibly visceral feelings just of the ambiances, and also strange things happen with nature in buildings. It's really, really cool.
Yes.
Yeah, you have that recording. What kind of bird was alighting in some abandoned, insane asylum or something, Matthew? Crows or starlings flying and echoing in rumbling walls. That was pretty cool.
That was Romulus Air Force Base, which I got kicked out of. And then in West Virginia, in an abandoned school somewhere, actually that same piece that I included the bus recordings, I included just the sound of, I think it was a pigeon. I can't really tell. It didn't really have the tones in the flapping, but just trying to get out. And it was just, I think it's the most heartbreaking thing I've ever recorded.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And do we all agree or disagree that if we hear that the sound comes from nature or the real world, It has some different, relatedness to us rather than a sound made up. Like is there something sacred or desirable about these nature sounds?
As far as I'm concerned, I have always been mesmerized by how you experience a recording in a totally different way once you remove it from its source.
Mm-hmm.
Once you're not next to that pond anymore, or not next to that bus anymore, or not next to that bird anymore, it becomes a whole different thing. And even when you're there, you're probably recording it with headphones, you're listening to it, you still find sounds that you haven't heard while recording it.
Yeah, when I listen to these ponds, the sounds are so weird and people walk by. Usually I have a little speaker there. There's no sound. You toss the hydrophone in and the stuff coming out of the speaker just sounds like weird electronic music. People don't even believe it comes from the pond. And then sometimes it starts other animals singing, frogs and insects. They hear the underwater sounds and above the water, they start to join in because it's so strange. And I'm just sort of wrapping my head around this now, trying to figure out what that actually means, if anything.
Is there any evidence that the calls ever interact between species?
Underwater or everywhere?
I'm just talking about anywhere in the field. I mean, specifically, you hear one thing going along and then it'll stop when something, and I wonder.
Previously, like ornithologists tend to say, and biologists, so that the species-specific sound is all that matters to most birds and animals, but they're changing their mind now that we have better ways to analyze a lot of data, doing these kind of long recordings like the ones you've been doing. And they're realizing that, of course, certain birds all start around the same time. They respond to the noise, they fill in the space, and that it's much more like they do listen to other species, much more than we realize. We're just not sure what to say about that because we can't be certain what's happening. I think that's why, when humans start to take dong choruses as a whole more seriously, whether they're composers, music theorists, or biologists, to take in the whole thing, they'll hear all kinds of order and sound that previously we missed when we were focusing on the singular parts of what's going on.
I watched this video today on, I think, BBC, and it was about meerkats and a bird, a certain kind of bird that lives around meerkats. And what the bird does is it first wins their trust by warning them against an eagle. It raises an alarm, the bird, and the meerkats just run away. And then it tries it again, but the meerkats don't bite this time. And then the third time, the bird apparently has learned the meerkat alarm sound, and the bird just sings that sound, and the meerkats disappear. Yeah.
And why does the bird want the meerkats to disappear?
Because meerkats are digging and finding insects, yummy, juicy insects, and it just eats them.
I see.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say the bird helps the meerkats, and together they fight.
No. The bird is basically an asshole who steals things from meerkats. Yeah.
Which kind of bird is it that steals things from meerkats?
I don't remember. I can find the video for you, though.
Steal from a meerkat.
What's that?
I said, who would steal from a meerkat?
I don't know. If I were into scorpions, I would.
Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of stories of cooperation between different species. That, it's not all a war, a battle, but I guess you can find so much is going on in nature. You can find what you want. And do you think that can the music that responds to these natural sounds help scientists and others make sense of nature? Do you think scientists can learn from us when we're playing around with the same stuff they study in different ways?
I remember one encounter with scientists, David, years ago in a Berlin park.
That's in the book.
They didn't really like us.
That's for some scientists, but of course now you have the whole world of, the whole Museum of Natural History Berlin project. Scientists love musicians. They have all kinds of musicians now. And the people we ran into have quit. That's the old guard. They've quit. The new ones like making music with birds, as we know that there are different points of view. But I know, Emily, you never thought you'd work so much with scientists. Did it change your understanding of what different kinds of human knowledge?
Yeah. I mean, as I always say when I'm talking about doing interdisciplinary research, because now I'm also sort of helping facilitate other people doing interdisciplinary research a bit. But I feel like, obviously a large part of what I like about doing it is the obviously the subject, and I'm really interested in animal songs, but I also just like seeing different ways of approaching the world and different ways people work together, and different, in different fields, people think they can know different things, and they think the way to go about knowing it is very different, and they think the kinds of things you can say as being true or not true are very different. So I really, that's one of the things I enjoy most, is just is learning more different ways to look at something, and not only different ways to understand it, but different ways to think about how we might understand something. So yeah, I guess when I had written my doctoral dissertation, which I finished it in 2007, so and I started it 5 years before that. I probably would not have predicted that I would have ended up doing collaborative research with biologists. I was sort of looking at the question of whether animal song is music purely from the point of view of a musician, and I thought naively when I began my dissertation, I'll just figure out what music is, and then I'll just figure out if animal song is that. But of course, like all the research I most enjoy, it took me down all kinds of paths I wasn't expecting to go down.
Yeah, well, they're telling us we should kind of wrap up soon. So do you have any final statements on any of this? I thought we were just getting going, like we could get going all day. If it wasn't so nice outside, I got to get out there now. But
if it wasn't so late.
Yes.
Yes. But I don't know if anyone has any final thoughts to the listeners, who are probably a diverse bunch.
One thing, it was a drongo bird, D-R-O-N-G-O.
I heard about this connection, the drongo meerkat.
I'm pasting the link to that video in the chat.
Thanks.
Hilarious, that really.
Guys, given that this is an Eventide thing, I wanted to just show you what that keyboard that you saw earlier has now become. This will be an Eventide product. I don't know if I can.
Is it secret? Are we allowed to know that it exists?
What's that?
We're allowed to know. It's no longer a secret. Wow.
It's not officially out yet. But
We can't hear you, Leon.
Cool.
oh, yeah, it's not officially out yet.
Can you bring it closer so we can see the?
Well, yeah, that would be nice.
It's a modular, right?
This is a Euro rack unit, and can you see?
Yes.
So we were talking about intervals. Well, actually, it's in a tone row mode right now. So hold on.
So I see. Yeah.
So you pick a scale and a key, and then you move up and down by means of intervals.
Yeah. It's definitely the Samchillian writ large.
Yes, it's exactly. So you can change. Oops, you can change what key you're in and what scale you're in. Here's a major scale, I guess.
And you better tell us how it got its name.
Well, actually, there's two products. So the Samchillian was the one you saw before.
Right. Are you still there? I want to hear how the new one got it. Yeah, go on.
Eventide just nuked Leon because he showed them.
Yeah.
Let's hear how the new one got its name. The origin myth of the Samchillian is too complicated, but this one is a good story and true.
Yeah.
How did the Misha get its name?
The Misha, well, that's my father. That was my father's nickname growing up.
Right. Are we going to tell you? Are we going to talk about him?
No, I think it's too complicated to get into. But
it's a good story.
He, you know what? He wrote a book recently, and Tony Agnello, at Eventide, read it, and he was inspired to name this book after my father, after his story of growing up during the Holocaust and all of that.
Okay, you don't want to tell the story, then it's going to be a mystery.
I think it's enough. It's you can, if you guys are very interested, you can contact me about his book. But and if you're interested in the Samchillian, just you see my name, Leon Gruenbaum. I have a website, leongruenbaum.com.
Yeah. And so when is Eventide going to release this amazing beast?
Well, we don't have an actual date yet, but I'm thinking it will have to happen at some point during this year.
Yeah, well,
it has been postponed to next year. Which year do you exactly mean?
Yes. It reminds me of, wasn't there a story about JFK promising astronauts on the moon within the decade, and it was ambiguous whether it was like the early 60s, and it wasn't clear if he meant 10 years from today or
Right.
in the 60s.
Right.
So yeah, within a year.
Yeah.
As long as doesn't take as long as the building of the new Berlin airport, everything is.
So yeah, what's
right.
that airport? Is it being turned into another park, or it's going to open one day?
They will open. That's what they say. They are about to close the other airport, but now they still consider to leave it open for some reason or for the time being. But they promise. That's what they say. It will be opened. The new one fall this year.
Amazing.
And see if that. Yeah, you might arrive in Berlin next time in this super shiny new airport from 2012.
I'm excited. Okay, anyone else? Any final words?
Yeah.
Well, I can also do an Eventide. Like, I own 2 H9 pedals and I love them.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, my rig here has an H9 in the path, so I've really been a big fan of it.
I use it to like process orchestral instruments, like in orchestras and voice and everything. I really use them a lot. They're like my workhorses.
Yeah, and those of you who don't know anything about Eventide, if there are some in the group, this company, invented the first digital delay. They pioneered the harmonizer, and they've worked with so many kinds of musicians for decades. And the founders are so interested in so many kinds of music. That's why they invited us to do this conversation, and we thank them for that.
So, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Tony, Richard, James, everyone, Emily, Eventide. It's been great to do this. I hope some of you are listening and you learned something and had fun, and we're happy to talk with all of you further. And soon the world opens up. We can go out there and listen more to the world and turn it into things. So thank you for being here.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Thank
Good night.
Thank you, David.
Bye.